Now, the superannuation industry has hit back and claims that federal government tax breaks are overly generous. Changes to super tax concessions have been a hot topic since November, when Treasury Secretary Martin Parkinson questioned whether tax breaks are too high and favour the rich. While research from Mercer suggests super rules in Australia are not overly generous when compared against the world's best retirement savings systems. For more on the findings, we're joined in the studio by David Anderson from Mercer. David, look, a pleasure to have you on. I wanted to start with the Superannuation Sentiment Index. Look, tell us a little bit about it before we get into some of the findings.
So back in 2008, we were concerned that Australians didn't understand the connection between their superannuation and share market performance. And so one of the things we wanted to test was how strong was that understanding, and how does that contrast with the reality, which is most of their superannuation benefits are connected to investment markets somehow. So this is the 8th instance of the index since 2008. And I think one of the things that we found was that people's general satisfaction with their super is pretty stable, but they're going through this awakening, this reality setting in, which is account balances are now back at their pre-GFC levels, only just now, 5 years later, and they're realising that Australians are living longer and they're probably not going to have enough super.
And look, is it a relatively new, as you say, sort of awakening? Because as you say, during the global financial crisis, I mean, super took an absolute hammering for many people, particularly if they were about to head into retirement or indeed were actually relying on that super pot.
Yeah, absolutely. In that first year, super account balances went down on average 30%. That's a big hit. And what we've got in superannuation in this country, James, is this issue of sequencing risk. So if you were planning retirement in the few years leading up to 2008, or indeed in that period from 2008 to 2012 when the markets were recovering, then where were you left? Essentially, you were left with very few options. You had to work for longer.
So, look, 8 surveys to date. What's the latest one showing? What were the main findings?
The latest one is showing that essentially 2/3 of Australians don't believe they're going to have enough super to pass, to get through the age of 70. And 80% of them believe they've got no hope of getting beyond 80 with their accumulated superannuation savings. So it kind of leaves us in a bit of a dilemma. And super's a big business now, right? It's a big industry, $1.5 trillion worth of assets in the system, which is greater than the country's GDP and greater than actually the amount of money on deposit in banks. So it's a big business, but it's at a crossroads. Account balances only now just back to their pre-GFC levels. The government's going to increase contributions from 9% to 12%. So how do we make sure we take people on a journey where they build confidence in the system over that time, maximise their contribution possibilities, but also make sure we set better default investment portfolios so that people at the age of 25 with 40 years working life in front of them and 60 years worth of investing in front of them aren't taking the same level of risk and return approach as someone in the 5 years prior to retirement.
You mentioned the word confidence. Do you think, has there been an erosion of confidence in the superannuation system here in Australia? Because it is one that has been faced globally, and we'll get to how it stands against some global peers, but do you think there has been a drop-off in confidence in this?
I don't believe so, and our study hasn't found that. But what there's 2 things going on. One is there's an increasing level of awareness. Okay, so reality is setting in about how dependent people will become on superannuation. The index study found that most Australians will rely on super for 48% of their retirement funding. Okay, so that's half of all the things that they'll purchase in retirement. They're going to come from their super fund. The other factor that's happening, I think, is fear. So we have this speculation, super's a big honeypot. We have this speculation from time to time that the government is going to adjust the way in which it taxes the system and the concessions that it provides. So people become fearsome of what might happen as opposed to taking the most of what is available today.
Look, just on those tax concessions, an interesting result or finding is that despite some commentary out there, it is not quite as generous as we've been led to believe.
That's right. So we did a study of the world's leading retirement saving systems, and so there's 18 countries in the study. It's called the Melbourne Mercer Global Pension Index. 18 systems. We review them thoroughly. We went back and looked at the best 8 retirement saving systems in the world based on our study. And we wanted to test what are the degree of tax concessions provided to those 8 systems, and in what system do you produce a better result? And I guess understand that where does Australia sit, you know, relative to other saving systems? And we found that Australia sits 6th out of those 8. So there are 5 systems that produce a better outcome for the individual than the Australian system does.
Was that a surprise?
Not for those that work in the business, it wasn't a surprise, but for people that we speak to, it is a surprise, but because we constantly hear from Canberra and other places, you know, the amount of concessions provided to superannuation is enormous and is treated as foregone revenue relative to the federal government's budget. So I think the difference in this country is we have a high degree of mandated contributions at the 9%. In other systems around the world, they're relying on those tax concessions to create an incentive for people to save. So that's the big difference here.
Who's beating us? Who's topping the list?
Oh, the Canadians. So in fact, there was
those pension plans coming around and buying up infrastructure.
the Canadians, the Brits, and also the Americans are beating us on an after-tax net benefit basis.
It's interesting. It all feeds into, I suppose, from another way of looking at it is the level of literacy out there at the moment and understanding of the system. I mean, do you think, on average, that the level of financial literacy is where it should be, or do you think there's room for improvements? Absolute
room for improvement. So the level of financial literacy in Australia is not where it could be. Our recent study found that only 22% of people could answer correctly 7 out of 10 questions relating to financial matters, and that's a bit of a damning indictment on our system. We think there's a lot of work that employers and the government and individuals can do to improve the level of financial literacy and to get help. Mainly people don't think they're going to have enough superannuation because they don't know what decision process to go through in order to increase their super benefit.
Absolutely. Look, David Anderson, got to leave it there. Fascinating. Thanks very much.
A pleasure, James. Thank you.
David Anderson there from Mercer.